There's a rule in the deep woods of the Appalachians. If you hear your name called from the dark, do not answer. In the fall of 2024, I took a solo camping trip deep into the wilderness of western North Carolina. I wanted peace. I wanted to escape the noise of the city, so I pitched my tent miles away from the marked trails on BLM land where nobody could find me. But 3 hours after midnight, the forest went dead silent. No crickets, no owls, just an empty, suffocating quiet. And then the footsteps started. 2 feet, walking slowly toward my tent. But what was standing outside my nylon wall that night wasn't a bear, and it certainly wasn't human. If you think you're safe inside your tent, listen to what happened next, because after tonight, you will never sleep in the woods again. To understand how I ended up in that situation, we have to go back to the beginning of that afternoon. I'm an experienced camper. I've spent weeks in the Pacific Northwest, hiked parts of the Rocky Mountains, and survived on my own in some of the harshest conditions. I wasn't a rookie. I knew the risks of the wild, or so I thought. I arrived at the trailhead around 3 in the afternoon. The sky was a pale, bruised gray, and the air carried the sharp, freezing bite of late autumn. As I was checking my gear at the bed of my truck, an old park ranger pulled up in his muddy green SUV. He rolled down his window, looked at my heavy pack, and frowned. "Heading out far?" he asked. His voice was raspy, worn down by years of working in the backcountry. "Just a few miles out near the Blackwood Ridge," I replied, adjusting my tactical knife on my belt. The ranger's expression shifted. The casual warmth left his face, replaced by a cold, hardened stare. He looked out toward the tree line, where the shadows of the pines were already stretching across the dirt road like long, black fingers. "If I were you, son, I'd stick close to the main campground tonight," he said, his voice dropping to a low murmur. "We've had some strange reports out near Blackwood. Hikers hearing things, finding things." I chuckled, thinking he was just trying to scare a tourist. "Bears or coyotes?" "Neither," the ranger said, looking me dead in the eyes. "Just don't leave your tent after dark, and if you hear someone calling for help, keep your mouth shut and stay inside." Before I could ask him what he meant, he rolled up his window and drove off, leaving me alone in the gravel dust. I shrugged it off. In the camping community, rangers telling creepy stories is a running joke. I grabbed my pack, locked my truck, and stepped onto the trail. I hiked for about 4 miles. The deeper I went, the thicker the forest became. The ancient oak trees and towering pines seemed to crowd the trail, blocking out the fading daylight. By the time I reached Blackwood Ridge, it was nearly 5:30. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in deep shades of crimson and purple. I found a small, flat clearing surrounded by dense brush. It was the perfect spot, highly isolated, protected from the wind, and completely off-grid. I pitched my 4-season tactical tent, built a small, controlled campfire, and sat down to eat my freeze-dried meal. For a couple of hours, everything was perfect. The crackle of the fire was comforting. The stars above were brighter than I had ever seen them. I felt completely at peace. Around 10 p.m., the fire began to die down to glowing red embers. The temperature was dropping fast, probably close to freezing. I crawled inside my tent, zipped up the heavy outer rainfly, got into my sub-zero sleeping bag, and turned off my headlamp. Plunged into total darkness, I fell asleep to the soothing sound of the wind whispering through the pine needles. I woke up suddenly.
I didn't know what time it was, but my body was tense. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. You know that primal, instinctual feeling you get when you're being watched? That sixth sense that screams at you that danger is near? I had that, in waves. I reached for my phone. It was 3:14 a.m. And then I realized why I had woken up. The forest was dead. When you camp in the wild, there is always a background hum, crickets chirping, frogs near a creek, owls hooting, the wind moving the leaves. But right now, there was absolutely nothing. It felt as if the entire forest had collectively held its breath. Then I heard it.
It was about 50 feet away from my tent, near the tree line. I froze, my muscles locked up. I listened, barely breathing.
It wasn't a quadruped. A deer or a bear walks with a distinct 4-beat rhythm, patter, 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 patter. This was a heavy, deliberate, 2-legged stride. Step, pause, step, pause. It was walking with a strange, uneven limp, like one leg was dragging behind the other. My mind raced. Was it a lost hiker? A hunter? But who hikes deep into the Appalachian backcountry at 3 in the morning without a flashlight? Because there was no light outside. My tent fabric was thin, and if someone had a headlamp, I would have seen the glow through the nylon. Whoever or whatever was out there was navigating the pitch-black woods in complete darkness. The footsteps got closer. 30 feet, 20 feet. It stopped, right at the edge of my clearing. I slowly slipped my hand out of my sleeping bag and gripped the handle of my Glock 19, which I kept in my chest holster. The cold steel felt reassuring, but my hand was shaking. For 5 agonizing minutes, nothing happened. The silence returned, so loud that I could hear the rushing of blood in my own ears. I started to tell myself that maybe it was just a stray animal. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me due to exhaustion. I began to slowly release my breath, and then a voice spoke from the darkness outside.
Hello? Is anyone in there? My flashlight died. My blood turned to ice. The voice sounded like a young man, but there was something deeply, horribly wrong with it. The pitch was flat. The spacing between the words was unnatural. It sounded like someone reading a script in a language they didn't understand, or worse, like a bird mimicking a sound it had heard. I remembered the old ranger's warning. If you hear someone calling for help, keep your mouth shut. I stayed dead silent. I held my breath, my finger resting lightly on the trigger of my gun. Hello? The voice called out again. This time it was closer, right outside the camp. I'm lost. I'm so cold. Please open the tent. The voice was directly mimicking the exact words, but the inflection was identical to the first time. It was a perfect, carbon copy repetition. No human speaks like that. No human can repeat a sentence with the exact same microtones and glitches twice. Then the dragging footsteps started again, but they weren't walking to the tent. They were walking around it.
It was circling my tent, slow, dragging. Every few steps it would stop and sniff. I could hear deep, wet, animalistic sniffing sounds pressed against the thin nylon of my tent wall. It was smelling me. Suddenly, the dragging stopped. Right at the back of my tent. I was lying on my back, and my head was only about 6 inches away from the tent wall. My heart stopped. I could hear it breathing through the fabric. It was a ragged, wet, rattling breath. It smelled like rot, like decomposing meat and stagnant swamp water. The smell was so potent, it penetrated the tent wall, making me gag silently. Then the voice came again, but it wasn't the young man's voice anymore. It was my voice. Hello? Is anyone in there? My flashlight died. It was mimicking my own voice. It had heard me speak to the ranger earlier, or it was somehow pulling the sound of my voice straight out of my head.
Hearing your own voice, warped and hollow, spoken by something standing inches from your head in the dark, is a level of terror I cannot put into words. Tears of pure adrenaline and fear ran down my temples. I raised my Glock, pointing it directly at the spot on the tent wall where the breathing was coming from. If it tried to rip through the fabric, I was going to empty the magazine. Then the worst thing happened. The creature had moved to the front of the tent, and it was touching the rain-fly zipper. Zit! It pulled the zipper down about 2 inches, then stopped. Zit! Another 2 inches. I knew that if that rain-fly opened and I had to look at whatever was on the other side, I would lose my mind. I couldn't stay passive anymore. I took a deep breath, aimed my gun at the door, and screamed with every ounce of strength I had left. "I have a gun! I will shoot! Get the hell away from my camp!" The zipper stopped instantly. The silence returned. 10 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute. Then a terrifying sound broke the quiet. It was a laugh. It sounded like a hyena mixed with a screaming woman, echoing through the empty Appalachian night. And then something sprinted away into the woods, but it didn't run like a human. It sounded like something heavy, crashing through the thick branches and trees at impossible speed, snapping thick limbs as it went. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat there, gun pointed at the entrance, shivering in the freezing cold until the first light of dawn broke through the trees. When the sun finally rose, I packed my gear in less than 3 minutes, leaving my campfire cooking stove behind. As I ran past the front of my tent, I looked down at the dirt. There were no human footprints. There were only deep, elongated, 2-toed gouges in the mud, as if something with heavy, blunt claws had been standing there, waiting. I hiked the 4 miles back to my truck in record time, constantly looking over my shoulder. When I finally reached the trailhead, the green Ranger SUV was gone. I got in my truck, locked the doors, and drove 3 hours straight without stopping. I still go camping, but I never go alone, and I never, ever camp in the Appalachians, because I know that out there, in the deep, dark woods, something is still wandering, mimicking the voices of the lost, waiting for someone to unzip their tent.